Hello, everyone. My name is John White, and I've been teaching um, history, Black Civil War history for about 20 years. And just yesterday, I posted something about the first Memorial Day, and that's what I decided to do here. This it started with last Friday. I was watching Governor Andrew Cuomo uh, in his update. He asked the question, where was the first official recognized Memorial Day celebration? And his answer was in 1866, President Lyndon B. Johnson, I think they mean Lyndon Baines Johnson. That's not the right president. Declared Waterloo, New York, the birthplace of Memorial Day. Uh, President Johnson took over after President Lincoln was assassinated, but it was not um, Lyndon B. Johnson. The This also is not correct. The birthplace of Memorial Day was actually in Charleston, South Carolina. It should not be Charleston, North Carolina. I'm going to have to edit that. A Confederate Union, a Confederate prison was in Charleston, and they buried many Union soldiers in a mass grave. Uh, Basically, what happened is that uh, they had ended prisoner exchange, which is I want to talk about later. And because they ended prisoner exchange, Union soldiers basically just starved to death in Confederate prisons, and Charleston was one of them. And at the end of the war, blacks, emancipated blacks, uh, dug up the remains of the Union soldiers that was in the mass grave, and they gave them a proper burial. And they also had a very large celebration. 10,000 people participated, and school children were carrying roses and singing John Brown's Body. And to really understand this celebration that they had, you really need to understand the situation that led up to this. And as just like uh, Governor Cuomo didn't acknowledge or say anything about what had happened in Charleston, there's a lot of history that is never talked about, that the history that led up to this. And I'm going to talk about this. In order to understand this, the biggest thing that we have to really grasp, get our hold on, is racism, and that all evolves around our um, our love of liberty. Liberty is in America's most honored and respected value, and we're all taught in school about Patrick Henry's speech where he says, "Give me liberty or give me death." Now, here's the problem. America felt that slaves were slaves because they wouldn't or couldn't do anything about it. And this is a cartoon that came out originally. Now, these attitudes change, but again, it's not recorded in history. This name of this one is called The Dark Artillery, or How to Make the Contrabands Useful. One thing that in order to really understand this thing, is that we have to be able to deal with the dreaded N word. Okay. When Europe discovered the blacks in Africa, they used Latin, and the English word for black was Niger, Niger. Um, the Germans was Neger, Niger. The Spanish was Negro. The French was Negri. All of these words were black. Well, what happened? Well, the word Niger, capital, turns into the pronoun Nigger. Why? Because of the picture that you see. And it's as simple as that. And nobody wants to deal with it because it creates pain on all sides. But the big problem that I have is, I don't mind you having pain, is that the slaves use the word Nigger constantly, but they meant capital Nigger, or capital Niger. Okay, that was the only name that they had when these Africans of different tribes were put together, different languages, but they were all united under one condition of slavery, and that is the name. But it does not mean that they did not respect themselves. And that is the problem that we have here. So this is actually the most important part of the whole thing, because it is identity. And if we deal with so-called, well, I hate to say it, but educated blacks that try to get rid of this, what they call the N word, because it is so bad. Okay, that's fine. But it means that you can't read the slave narratives. Because when the slave narratives, you'll find that the slaves constantly use that word. And so when you talk to very, very old people, blacks, you'll find that that word was used a lot. It was constant when you read the slave narratives. So it ended up with a dual meaning. For whites, it meant this picture. For blacks, the word meant identity, and they did not disrespect themselves. This is the disrespect generated by Jim Crow. Sorry. This is uh, the power of God was the only, sorry. This is the power of God is the only power that the slaves knew. And there was a practice of stealing away to Jesus that was done by slaves. And they were not allowed to pray alone without a white person being there. But when they became freed by the Union Army, they were called contrabands, and they were allowed to have their religious services. It's never talked about. Out of all my research, this is the only picture that I could find. There are books about the Still Away to Jesus prayer meetings. I mean, there's only one book, and that was by a professor, and he called it the Invisible Institution. This is an article that I got out of January 28, 1804, New York newspaper. that talks about legislation. The legislation was to um, pull a bunch of laws about blacks playing in the woods into one law. And but as I read through the slave narratives, I've never found a single case where on any plantation where black prayer meetings were legally legal without a white person being there. Um, I'm calling this with faith. Jesus turns victims into victors because we have to understand why religion was so important. Religion, as we read the slave narratives, I remember one slave saying, former slave saying, that he's a religious man now. He says, but it was nothing like when he was in slavery. He says you were just more naturally more religious back in those days. Why? Because I read one slave narrative where slavery in the Delta was really, really bad. And slaves in Tennessee were being sold to the Delta. And they felt that they'd rather be dead than to go down to the Delta and go through the cotton fields and live in slavery in the cotton fields. So they just decided that they were chained together. That when they boat crossed a river, that they would just walk off the side and drown themselves, and they did. And this probably happened because they didn't have their religious leaders with them. John Brown was the abolitionist. And these people were religious. The abolitionists were religious. So when we talk about Civil War, ending slavery, we remove religion from it, you basically get the history that you have now. When you add the religion to it, you got a totally different thing. Uh, John Brown believed that the answer to the slavery problem was to arm the Negroes. And this is a picture here of him kissing a black child. Well, he's on his way to the gallows. This came from a legend, and but that didn't really was, but it really is not what happened. What happened was John Brown was interviewed by a reporter, and he asked him why wouldn't he see clergy, and he said that he would not see any clergy that would support slavery, and he would rather go to the gallows with a slave lady and her child. And so that appeared in the paper. Soon after, a poem was written, and the poem they condensed it to another version of him kissing a black child on the way to the gallows. Now they say that this is a mural in the second floor rotunda of the Kansas State Capitol, and it basically depicts John Brown as starting the Civil War. And John Brown had 6 secret supporters. See, we were taught that John Brown was crazy. See, we were taught a lot of stuff. And we have to understand, as African Americans, our history and heritage is from the South. And the South controlled the narrative, they controlled the perspective. So the perspective of slavery and freedom and liberation came from the South and is deeply ingrained in everybody. Okay, but that perspective leaves out, is not the perspective of the black people that lived through it. There were six secret supporters. One was Wentworth Higginson and Theodore Parker. They were Unitary ministers. And Higginson, after John Brown was executed, was one of the few of his secret supporters that didn't hide and take off. In fact, he led the first South Carolina colored volunteers. And so I'll talk about them in a moment. Julian Howe, the wife of John Brown, a secret supporter, wrote a song called The Battle Hymn of the Republic. And the first line is, "My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." Well, if you've seen Dr. King's last speech, you will see that his last statement, and that was his last public statement, was, "My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." This Battle Hymn of the Republic served as a national anthem in the United States all the way up until the new one took place, which was 1831, which is the one that we have now. Um, the song came from John Brown's Body, which was a marching song. And that song came from "Say, Brothers, You Will Meet Me at Cannon's Happy Shore." Well, that song came from the Still Awaited Jesus prayer movements. Whenever they say black prayer meeting, they were illegal in the South. And so the song came from there. It came from their secret prayer meetings. But it made its way north and ended up being published in Boston, and it was one of John Brown's favorite tunes. And so that led to John Brown's Body, and which led to the Battle Hymn of the Republic. The first South Carolina volunteers, they were the first Negroes to be armed. General David Hunter was a friend of President Lincoln, and he was a friend of President Lincoln, and he was in charge of the South around uh, very close to um, let's see, I can't think of the place now in Port Royal. He established the first black regiment, first South Carolina colored volunteers. They weren't He did not get authorization from President Lincoln, and he was furious when he found out because the planners were complaining. Basically, this was Union held territory, and so they were disbanded. But one of the things that he said about them was they were deeply immune with that religious sentiment, call it fanaticism, such as like what made the soldiers of Cromwell invincible. They believed that now is the time appointed by God for their deliverance. Um, After the Emancipation Proclamation, we're told, oh yeah, that's where they freed the slaves. Yes, but they did one other thing. They armed the slaves. They armed the blacks. And uh, the other guy that I spoke of, Colonel Higginson, uh, became in charge. And he said, it used to seem to me that never since Cromwell days, I wonder if I can move this picture or I can't. There's been soldiers whom the religious element has had this place. They call themselves a religious army, a gospel army. Hate that. That's nothing I can do about that. This is General Benjamin Butler. Probably had the biggest effect on African Americans in the history of the United States. Probably even greater than Martin Luther King, because he's the one that convinced President Lincoln to not send the Negroes back to Africa like he wanted to, but to arm them and use John Brown's plan. He at first he was the person that said runaway slaves when the Union gets runaway slaves, they're going to be called they're contraband, and they're no longer the possession of their owners. Um, he mustered in the first black regiment, which was the Louisiana Native Guard. Now I'm trying to make this brief, but they were people of color. They were free from Louisiana. They were originally Confederates because they were free. Some of them owned slaves. They had guns. And Butler convinced them to join the Union Army. Um, Butler was put in charge of the Army of the James. One third of the Army of the James was black. And the goal of the Army of the James was to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond. He was a close advisor to President Lincoln, and so close that President Lincoln wanted him to be his vice president in the 1864 election. But Butler chose not to because Lincoln was having trouble with his election. He was having trouble with his election because white troops were carrying the ball. They were the ones that had to attack forts to free black folks. That was becoming more and more unpopular. Attacking these fortifications was suicide. It was Butler stayed so he could make a statement with black troops. And he did that at the Battle of New Market Heights, which we'll talk about later. Butler also crafted the first civil rights legislation following the war. He also, not only that, he appointed a woman to a position, and in his when he was, I believe when he was governor, I'm not sure, but you can Google that and find out the things that he did was just far in advance of of the people and the times. The Louisiana's Native Guards fought in the first battle. They fought in the Battle of Port Hudson. They were the only regiment that had black officers, and they attacked the fort 3 times until their numbers of 900 were reduced to 300, and they were finished. And so that loss was actually the biggest loss of a regiment during a fight in the whole Civil War. But they had a point to prove. They had, because uh, when Butler originally talked to them, Butler said, "Hey, my officers believe you guys won't fight." And he said, "Yes, we." They said, "Yes, we will, General. The only thing that run it among us is the white blood that's in us," because they were mixed race. Um, Here's an article. The New York Tribune, June 8th, 1863. Nobly done, the first regiment of Louisiana Native Guard, though you failed to carry the rebel works against overwhelming numbers, you did not charge and fight and fall in vain. That heap of 600 corpses laying there dark and grim and silent before and within the rebel works is a better proclamation of freedom than even President Lincoln's. A race ready to die thus was never yet retained in bondage and never can be. There's a lot of people that don't understand that African Americans are taught that they're victims, to be victims, always victims. Everything's around, built around you are a victim. Okay. People that aren't victims understand the meaning of this. And this goes back to the fabric of the United States. I've shown this to a lot of people. Well, they were black women, and they said, "Oh, it's just a case of us getting slaughtered." Um, that I'm sorry, but that's that Southern uh, perspective training. This is the Battle of Milliken's Bend. Um, One of the things that happened here is the white regiment from Iowa actually ran and left the black troops by themselves, and they were going to kill all the because they have a no core. I'll talk about that later, but they were going to kill all the black troops. The black troops ganged together and charged the Confederates and actually won that battle. William Wells Brown in 1867 was the first American historian. He wrote the first novel called Clotel, the President's Daughter. You got to remember, he caught hell. He caught hell because more than Frederick Douglass, because he was writing history. And history is extremely powerful. History and lack of history and changing history changes how much you should have to pay somebody, changes their opportunities. It makes a lot it makes a difference to know your history. The storming of Fort Wagner, Brown also wrote, this is the first Christian banner that has gone into our war. By a strange and yet not strange providence, God has mystic this despised race, the bearers of his standard. They are thus the real leaders of the nation. This was about the Battle of Fort Wagner, which the 54th Massachusetts was in, and it was shown in the movie Glory. Before this movie, I didn't even know blacks were in the Civil War. And me, like a lot of blacks, refused to believe anything else. If somebody taught us or tried to say anything different, like my next door neighbor that was a reenactor, I didn't believe it. We just because we said, hey, we believe the establishment. Well, this is what happens. What has happened to Black America is what is caused by believing the establishment. This is the Fort Pillow massacre, and this is important because what happened here was the fort was turned over by the white officers of the black men. They surrendered to the Confederates. And I think the Confederate leader was a guy named Forrest, General Forrest, who was loved in the South, in Tennessee. He's the Army of Tennessee, but he is given the responsibility of the massacre at Fort Pillow because all those that surrendered were killed and murdered. Um, uh, General Grant demanded that the Confederates change their policy of not taking black soldiers alive. And he told Butler to um, make that clear to them. But the Confederates refused. And so that was the end of prisoner exchange. So now you can see the link between prisoner exchange and Charleston, South Carolina. At the Battle of New Market Heights, black troops, this is Butler's attempt to demonstrate that black troops could handle the load. And so he decided to check to attack the flank of Lee's army that was at Richmond, and the whole a large part of Richmond's defenses shifted to where the black troops were, but the black troops still carried the works. And the white troops from the Army of the James went in and easily took Fort Harris. There was only 200 men there because they were all fighting the blacks at New Market Heights. Uh, they were given 15 Congressional Medals of Honor, and I always wondered why. Why was these the first medals of honor? And I think what happened was President Lincoln was losing the election. He was not expected to win the election. This demonstrated that blacks could perform frontal attacks, that they could take the hardest part of the war, the ugliest part, and could handle it and do it easily and not complain. And that's what happened. Again, we get back to the victim thing. If you hear anything, people yelling victim, victim, victim. I've heard them say that they forced the blacks to do it. Black people would even say that. That's just bad training. This is Richmond liberated. The Army of the James was had one third black. The blacks were put into um, the 25th Corps, and uh, the first division of the 25th Corps went into Richmond. The second division followed followed Lee all the way to Appomattox Courthouse. The leader of the 25th Corps, I believe his name was Witzel, and he occupied Jeff Davis's house. When President Lincoln came to visit Richmond, he came to that house and basically was talking with the commander of the black troops. And he asked him, "What are we going to do with these people?" And President Lincoln replied, "If I was you, I'd let them up easy." He said, "Let them up easy." Um, Now in Charleston, this is an interesting picture. It says marching on the 55th Massachusetts Colored Regiment, singing John Brown's Body, march into the streets of Charleston. That was February 21st. On April 4th, there was a large parade, and that was organized by the blacks of Charleston. And basically, this is the only celebration of black liberation in the whole Civil War. This is the major celebration. Okay. Uh, this After that celebration on April 4th, a month later, May 1st, is when they uh, repeated that parade with 10,000 people participating. And that was the first Memorial Day celebration, where they dug up the remains of the Union dead from uh, the Union dead from the prison, and gave them a proper burial, and then basically repeated their program for April 4th. And so that was the birth of Memorial Day. And um, yeah, that was basically the it was so successful and so overwhelming that the rest of the apparently the 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 president, after Lincoln was assassinated, decided to continue this practice, except he of course gave it to New York, scrapped the rest of the history, and gave it to New York and said that's the birthplace. And so there you had it. Sorry that this was so long, but it takes takes quite a while to do this. But anyway, well, thanks a lot for listening to it if you made it through, and we'll see you later. Oh, this material came from my book, uh, which is Soldiers of the Cross, the African American Journey from Slavery to the Promised Land. So I think that's available on Amazon. So anyway, well, good. Thank you and good night. We'll see you. Bye.